Welcome to the Steering Change Podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Hello, listeners of Steering Change. My name is Kelsey Hipkin, and I will be your host today. We are lucky to be joined today by Deborah Nilsen, Industry Specialist and Industry Support for the Workers' Compensation Board of Alberta, or as we will refer to them, WCB. AMTA is very fortunate to be able to work with Deb and her counterparts in advising disability management in the workplace. Also joining us today is a familiar voice on our podcast, Dave Elniski, Industry Advisor, Safety and Compliance on our Member Solutions team. As well, after today's chat, listen on for Rob Destry and myself as we break down the final round of the Steering Change Best Big Rig Movie Ever bracket. Dave, Deborah, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Deb, to start us off, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with WCB?
Yeah, I am an industry specialist with the Workers' Compensation Board. Been with the WCB about coming up 20 years. The first 5 of it, I worked directly with injured workers as a case manager. And then I moved over into the role of, we used to be called account managers, but they changed that to industry specialists. And what we do in this role is we really work with industry partners, employers. Our focus is to provide education regarding, obviously, the Workers' Compensation Act legislation and the WCB's policies, some of the best practices that you would have for a claim or your account, and ensuring that everyone has the resources available to assist them with developing the best disability management program. I kind of think of myself as a consultant. I don't make any decisions, but I do know the claim side as well as the account side. And if I don't know the answers, I can find them for you.
Awesome. Thank you. And we are going to delve into some of those resources in a little bit here. But firstly, Dave, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work with AMTA?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Dave Elniski, he, they, and I'm the Alberta Motor Transport Association's advisor, safety and compliance. So actually kind of have a similar role to Deb in the sense that it's providing information in my area of expertise so that companies and individuals can make better decisions. So a lot of it is helping carriers, other companies, safety folks, drivers, anybody who reaches out just with questions related to safety, like occupational health and safety, but also transportation specific. US DOT compliance, Canada's National Safety Code, dangerous goods, all those topics are kind of within my area. Started in transportation as a trucker, mostly long haul flatbed work before getting into fleet safety management, then eventually this role. And outside the AMTA, I'm a PhD student where I'm studying, health and safety in Canada's trucking industry. It's just a neat thing to quite enjoy it. And also an active Army Reserve soldier. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. My contact info will be in the show notes, and we're always available in this role to help anybody in this area.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. And thank you both for joining us. We will be covering a lot of information for our listeners out there. So any questions you might have stemming from this, we'll have a lot of it covered in our show notes, or feel free to reach out to us as well. So, Deb, let's get into it. Many organizations don't necessarily know about WCB. What support services does WCB offer to companies, both in terms of navigating the system and improving their disability management? And this is a lengthy question. Can you then elaborate on what improving that disability management means?
Okay. Well, for employers that are operating in general trucking, specialized trucking, and the garbage collection disposable industries, those are the main ones that are falling under the AMTA, WCB is a mandatory insurance that is paid for by employers, where we are covering or ensuring that there is coverage for any workers who are injured in the course of employment. The injury could be physical, which most people think of, but it can also be psychological, it could be occupational disease, heart attack, etc. For these industries that are falling under the AMTA, we actually have 2 of me, if I can say that. So Leigh-Ann Moroz, my counterpart, she's covering the southern part of the province, and I cover the northern part. I've already said I have about 20 years of experience. Leigh-Ann's got about 35 years of experience. So we definitely have a lot of knowledge, and I might be a little bit biased, but we are a great resource for employers in these industries. So we truly do enjoy the work that we do, and we do try to make an appearance at the AMTA monthly safety meetings. So if you don't go to those, please do, and introduce yourselves to either one of us, depending on what side of the province you're on. We also have some other great resources. So especially if you are new to the WCB world or in a role that's now dealing with WCB with the employer you're working with, I do recommend that you look at our seminars. We have a variety of seminars. They are at no charge, virtual on the most part, but we are starting to do some in-person ones again, which I'm excited for. Overall topics, we have employer information. So that's really talking about the account side and coverage that you need to have. And that's super important in the trucking industry. And I think we have a question on that coming up. So I'll leave more information future-wise. The main one we have for disability management is return to work. So that's going to go over are you legislated to do when you have a worker who is injured, but then also what are the best practices to managing the claim. Psychological injuries in the workplace. So just looking at what do we accept for mental health claims and best practices once again. We have an appeals seminar. So we are legislatively based and guided by the Workers' Compensation Act. We make a lot of decisions, but the stakeholders, which would be the worker and or the employer, do have the ability to appeal. So we're the neutral administrator. So, we certainly can guide and direct you on how to appeal decisions. We also have another one I quite enjoy, which is action planning. And that's really how do you determine what the gaps are in your disability management program and how do you improve those gaps? So I really like that one. We have a great website with lots and lots of information on it. The search engine is where I go in that website most part because you can get lost in the website with so much information. Through that, we also have a wonderful MyWCB portal, and we keep updating that with so many different resources. We've got a fit for work dashboard, all claims dashboard, account dashboard, premium simulator, which is something that is fairly new, some other key performance indicators, and lots of different reports. And then employer app would be another one. So you can report an injury. You don't know what to do for modified work. We will have something industry-specific options, and you can even do a modified work letter through the app to put that out there. You can also request clearances and make payments, so many different things there. So lots and lots of different resources that we have. Now, there was a second part to that question, Kelsey, and I don't know if I answered that one.
Can you elaborate on what improving disability management means?
Really, claims costs impact premiums. So there's two sides of it. The first is the human aspect. You truly want to take care of your workers. They are the ones that are doing the work and generating the revenue, and your doors are open because you have workers doing the work that's required to be done. Take care of them. If they are injured, and I always say whether it's occupational or non-occupational, take care of them the same. Make sure that they know they are valuable to you. Whether they're injured or not, you have something for them to be able to do. They can contribute. They are part of the bigger picture. It is more beneficial for a worker to be performing the modified duties and contributing for their mindset, for their mental health, for ensuring that the finances are coming in the same time. That's less stress. When you're injured, you don't need more stress and worry and concern. And will I have a job? Will I not have a job? The other side of it, though, is we are an insurance system. So just like a motor vehicle insurance, if you have more claims, if you have more speeding tickets, you have more liability, you're going to be paying more. So with the Workers' Compensation Board, if you have, now safety is key. Keep everyone safe, and that's AMTA's wheelhouse. They have great resources and great things for employers to promote and develop a great safety program. When the injury happens, though, having a good, strong disability management program that is truly involving modified work and getting the worker back to work will assist with keeping the claims costs down, which directly can impact and reflect in the workers' compensation premiums. And nobody wants to pay more in premiums than what they need to. So definitely strong safety, strong disability management, better for your workers, and then also for the business in regards to the premium costs.
Thank you. And speaking of making appearances, Deb did mention Leigh-Ann and herself are at AMTA regional meetings. They've started up again for the fall, so you can definitely stay tuned for those. As well, Deb, we next get to see you in Grand Prairie. You're doing a presentation at our Grand Prairie Safety Summit. Can you touch a bit on what you'll be covering there?
Yes, very excited to be going to Grand Prairie. I love the people in Grand Prairie. They're always so welcoming and engaged and just wonderful. What we're looking at doing, and we're kind of playing off of the AMTA. So, if those who don't know, the AMTA developed a great resource for employers in the industry with their psychosocial hazard controls. I think it's on their website. They can check that out. It's wonderful. So we've decided, why don't we kind of expand on that and present some information on psychological injuries in the transportation industry at the different safety summits. So they've already had some this year. Grand Prairie is coming up in October, and there's going to be some more next year in different locations as well, too, that we'll hopefully get out to and talk about the same topic. But what we're really going to be looking at is going over work-related psychological diagnosis, what the WCB looks at for accepting and adjudicating those psychological injury claims, the important role that the employer has, and the resources that are available. I'm hoping that employers will be able to take this information and utilize it to try to assist with preventing psychological injuries in the workplace. And then if we do still have the injuries coming through, at least they would have a safe and early return to work program for workers who are experiencing a mental health diagnosis.
Definitely some very important stuff there. And speaking of those psychosocial hazards, we happen to have the author of an AMTA paper right here with us. Dave, I think you have some questions for Deb as well.
I do. Yeah, I do. And I'm glad to hear that, the momentum continues on the psychological health and safety front. Seems to not be a flash in the pan. It looks like industry is really, at least a lot of it anyways, is really embracing and wanting to move in that direction. So I guess, Deb, the first question I have for you then, for a company that wants to improve their disability management, what are some things that they can do that are, relatively straightforward and maybe likely to lead to good results? Like, I guess the low-hanging fruit of the disability management world. Like, where should they start?
Really, I would say, obviously, always investing in safety is huge, because then if workers aren't getting injured, you don't really need too much focus on a disability management program. Everyone's safe. So that's number one, is safety. But for the Workers' Compensation Board, modified. It really does, and I already went through some of the benefits for it. You got to start having something already in your back pocket for modified duty. So it shouldn't be somebody's injured and now I need to figure it out and I'll wait for WCB. And because there is a trick with Workers' Compensation Board where if you can keep a claim no time lost from work, so that means you have modified duties available and preferably performed for the next scheduled shift, and the worker doesn't miss any time from work. If the medical stays under our threshold amount, which is reviewed every year, but for the 2024 year, it is determined to be $1,900. So that includes a couple of doctor's visits and maybe about 4 weeks of physio. So for the less significant injury claims, you have a no time loss claim, medical stays under $1,900, the claim does not impact you. But that means you need to have modified duties for the next available shift. So if I get injured at 4 o'clock today, does anyone want to be spending the night trying to figure out what I can do tomorrow morning first thing? Probably not.
No.
So I strongly recommend that employers have something in their back pocket that gives an idea of what they could have available for modified duties. Now, so much of it can depend on what is the injury, what are the restrictions, what's their date of accident, job, different things like that. But if you have a list thinking about a physical injury, let's say they can't use their dominant hand, what could they do? Let's say they sprain their ankle and they're on crutches, what could they do? Backs, right? With back injuries, we're probably going to be looking at changing positioning, right? Sitting all day will not be good. Standing all day will not be good. So what would you have as options there? And actually having a modified duty task list already developed now. We do have one that can be utilized as an example. We also, from a prior trucking company, I don't think they're around anymore, but they provided us with a list of 99 things to do if you have nothing to do. This is not necessarily a list of 99 modified duty options, but it sure is a creative way for employers to think about different things that a worker could do while they're recovering from an injury. And keep in mind, if a worker is off on a disabling injury claim, those costs are going to be a claims costs, and that's going to impact premiums. Can impact premiums and can impact premiums significantly. There is no value of service to paying more premiums. So sometimes employers are thinking, well, I can't really afford modified work. I have so many deliveries, routes, whatever I have to get going out the door. I've already had somebody else come in to cover that driver's run, and now I have to pay somebody to do modified duties. Modified duties will cost money for an employer. Not having modified duties will very much likely cost the employer much more at the end. And just keeping that worker engaged, giving them purpose in their day, making them have something to think of, hey, I got to get up and I got to go to work and I got to do this, is so much better than sitting on the couch thinking of everything they can't do. And will I ever go back? What will my coworkers think of me? Will I re-injure myself if I do go back? What if they fire me and I don't have job security anymore? We don't need people worrying about more than just the recovery of their injury. So that's definitely, I would say, the low-hanging fruit is have a plan before injuries even occur. Check out our app if you don't have any ideas, and I can certainly provide the list of 99 things to do so we can have those in the show notes, as well as modified duty task list that we've come up with. It just has some outlines of sedentary limited duties or light duties that could be available for different trucking companies.
Okay, so that makes sense. So then really to recap then, if a company doesn't have a disability management program in place, starting with building the modified duties out and defining their policies around that's really where they should be starting.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess I know I've spoken to companies on this, and I guess it's tough to shift from operational today thinking to maybe this other type of thinking. And so people can, we don't have any other work. We only do the work we do. If otherwise we would do it. But I guess, organizations, like I'm glad you're sharing that resource. Companies too, that have also done their formal hazard assessments will have a list of all their tasks and all the things they do in the organization. So, I mean, they probably have a lot of this information too. It's just thinking of it this way. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and expand it out to everyone. We even say sometimes do a little bit of a competition and have a $50 gift card or something available to people who give you an idea on what could you do for modified duties if you couldn't use your dominant arm, or if you couldn't, you were on crutches. What else could you do? And anyone who enters a valid, legitimate, good option could be entered into a draw. Then your workers are aware that you have modified duties because they were involved in the discussion of it, the development of it. Modified should never be a surprise. And you might not know that your payroll individual has a list of things that they need done that they don't have time to get to. And maybe somebody could be assisting them with that. Or the safety individual might need some help. Or you don't have as much safety as you need. And sometimes it's cross-training. So I don't know if you guys know this, but I was a dispatcher, and that's how I met my husband. He was a driver. And I always say sometimes it's good to get the drivers in the dispatch office just to even look at what's going on, because there can be a lot more respect. So sometimes it could be potentially cross-training, or maybe that driver knows where all the different companies are and different things are, and they could be updating route maps or something along that lines. It sometimes is thinking outside the box, and it might not be a super, this needs to be done today, but it would be a nice to have. That could be a great modified work opportunity. Now, back in the day, we used to say, if you couldn't work from home before, how can you work from home after? But now that COVID has happened, lots of people work from home, including myself. So especially, let's say the worker breaks their ankle and they're sitting at home with a cast on. Well, could you not offer, do you have a laptop and here, take some AMTA training? You could, I've been on your website, guys. You have so much online training. It's unbelievable. And if it's going to be enhancing that worker skill set and knowledge base, that's appropriate modified duties. So there's definitely options, even if the worker is limited in what they can do.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I guess the next question, kind of a bunch of questions, but it's all about WCB coverage. More talking about like really the rules around it for companies that maybe aren't clear on them. I'll just read it all out, and then maybe we'll go back to whichever part of it stands out the most. So I guess first, like, are there any companies operating in Alberta that would not need WCB coverage? Are there any people within a company that do not need WCB coverage? And finally, what are the WCB requirements for contractors? So when we're talking trucking, like owner operator, lease operator, drivers.
Yes, and the workers' compensation coverage is mandatory for a lot of industries, but not all of them. Now we have workers' compensation regulations, and it has a list of industries that would not require coverage. I can tell you, trucking and garbage and buses are mandatory. So looking at this, we have pawnbrokers are not. Religious orders are not, mobile museums. So there are certainly a few.
Okay. So if a trucking company just like takes something historical and just put it on the passenger seat of the truck and we're a museum. We're a museum. We don't have that wouldn't probably work. That's fair though.
Well, and it truly was started with, I believe anyway, the industries that have the higher risks were mandated. So there are still some where maybe it wasn't legislated because they didn't feel that there was significant risk. That is something that any changes to that would be made by the government. Farming was not mandated, and then they did come about many, many years ago. That's not my industry, so I'm not the specialist in that area. But yeah, you do need to have the coverage. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. So what we're looking at is what do you do as a company overall? So if you are trucking, we actually have 3 trucking industries. We have general trucking, specialized trucking, and oil field trucking. So we're going to be asking, what do you haul? What are you doing? What are your operations? And then everyone in that company is going to fall under that industry. So we would not ever split it up to go, okay, well, your admin staff go here, your dispatchers go here, your warehouse goes here. It would all fall under that main industry. Sometimes we can split the industry if we can confirm that the car wash, the truck wash, is completely separate from the trucking company. And if the trucking company closed, the car wash would stay alive. So those are the things that we would have to look at. Or we have that separation to go, the warehouse is completely separate payroll, separate safety, and the trucking company is separate. So we would need to have that. So not very often do I see a trucking company with more than one industry if truly they are trucking in the province of Alberta. All of those individuals, you would be paying the same premium rate for everyone. And that is actually, some people are like, well, that's not fair. There's less risk for our office staff. But imagine if we just had the truckers in one and the office staff in the other. Office staff might be lower, but the trucking would be substantially higher. So it's kind of good that everyone in that organization is under that same industry rate. Now, if you are an employer in trucking, garbage industries, bus industries, you have to have coverage if you have workers. Now, what we've experienced historically is, well, you're a subcontractor, so you're not our worker. And in the WCB, you can have a subcontractor, but the WCB will still say that is your worker. So it's a little bit different. Just because you're looking at them as I'm not paying your CPP or your employment insurance, I'm not assisting with those contributions, you don't get vacation time or anything, you are a subcontractor, you get 20% of the load, whatever it is, you really need to double check to ensure whether or not you need to have coverage for that individual. So what we're looking at for contractors and subcontractors is you need to cover them unless they have an active WCB account, which you as the principal need to ensure that that account is active and open and in good standing. And you can certainly do that through an automated clearance system that we have. So it's not going to be a lot of work. You enter them into the automated clearance system, and then you get an email alert if something happened to that account. If you are, let's say, the contractor subcontractor is incorporated and you are paying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Alberta Limited. If the worker is a director of their own incorporated company, they don't need to have coverage. But here's the thing. You as the principal need to ensure that you're paying the company, not the worker, that they are the director of that company, and that they are eligible and have declined that coverage. So that last part is the most important, one of the most important steps, and it's the one that is missed. We need to ensure that that director of that incorporated company would meet our business test. Because what we had is, oh no, you just incorporate and then we don't have to worry about you, we'll pay the company. And no, that's a workaround people found, and it doesn't match with what the workers' compensation is truly about, and that is an employer is covering for workplace injuries. So we don't want employers finding a little loophole where they're like, okay, you're not our worker anymore, we'll just get you to incorporate. So with this business test, what we want to ensure is that this person, director of this company, is running a business. So do they have multiple contracts? Do they have business expenses? Now, owning their own vehicle is definitely a business expense when we're talking about a semi. That's a huge expense. That you're not going to get groceries in that vehicle. A little different for our couriers, but what we would look at there. Now, if you're leasing from the principal, is there enough of a separation there? I'm not sure about that. But does the individual have a risk of loss? Do they advertise for themselves? Do they have business insurance, bank account, GST, all of that other information? So we would weigh that. We would look at it, and if they meet the business test and they are a director, they could decline that coverage. And then you have them as a contractor, subcontractor. You have confirmed that you are paying that company, not the worker's name, but a company, and that they are the director of that company. They are passing that business test, but they've declined the coverage.
Okay. No, that makes sense then. So I guess to recap, so there are companies in Alberta that would not need WCB coverage. Directors of corporations that can pass the business test can decline. They can get it if they want to, but they also don't need to have WCB coverage. And I guess really that business test then is also, that's what owner-operators would kind of have to consider then if they want to be a true contractor in that sense and manage their own WCB or decline it or something like that.
It all falls back to that principle, though. Whoever's paying that subcontractor contractor really needs to make sure, because the coverage could default back to that principle. And now you have someone who's an owner-operator and we're saying, okay, trucking company, it's actually yours. And this is going to have the impact on your premium. So the liability could fall back. And yeah, a lot of companies don't recognize that.
I'm gonna sneak one more little thing in there because I do think it ties in. It's a question that I get from time to time. So, a lot of trucking companies in Alberta are federally regulated as opposed to provincially, because that's a federal undertaking if they're crossing provincial borders. And sometimes that means the whole company and all its staff are federally, and sometimes it's not quite that clear. But anyway, so some of these companies federal, some are provincial. Does that make a difference if you're a federally regulated corporation but still operating in Alberta? You still need WCB coverage.
Yeah, you need the coverage you actually need the coverage in the jurisdictions that you are traveling through. And if it's falling under the Alberta jurisdiction, then, we don't care if you're federal or not. If it arises out of an occurrence in the course of employment, we can certainly accept that claim. But that's another piece of the puzzle for employers in the industry is you do need to have the coverage in every jurisdiction you're traveling through. Now, we do have an interjurisdictional agreement with the different provinces and territories in the country. So you can rather prorate, and I'm trying to think here, it's prorating the mileage that you have in every jurisdiction and then paying the premiums accordingly to that. Or you can enter into an alternate assessment procedure where you pay the premiums to the jurisdiction where the worker resides. And then the coverage will still extend. So the people in the payroll and trying to figure out the assessable earnings in each jurisdiction probably would appreciate if you joined the alternate assessment procedure, because it makes it very much more straightforward and you're not having to prorate things across the different jurisdictions. But it is really important that you ensure that you have the appropriate coverage. so that if you're an employer operating out of Alberta and your worker is injured in Saskatchewan or Ontario, the worker actually would have the ability to pick the jurisdiction in which they would like the claim managed.
Okay.
Yeah, as a result, you have to have the coverage in all those jurisdictions that you're traveling through.
Well, that's good to know. That's a big part of it then for trucking companies that operate outside of Alberta. Thank you
Which
very
is
much.
why Leigh-Ann and I are just a great resource, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes the AMTA is always so good at supporting us with getting any information out, and we do try and give industry-specific updates at the regional meetings. But yeah, Leigh-Ann and I can be a great resource.
And I think that's
employers.
really important to reiterate here too, is that, for anybody listening to this, whether you're a driver and you're not sure if you're covered, or you're a contractor, company owner, whatever, there's people you can contact at the WCB who are happy to help. And that's, so, it is that information is there. The organization has that mechanism. So take advantage.
Well, and sometimes, like I said, you don't know what you don't know, and you ask one question and then it leads you down into 3 other areas where you're like, oh, that question makes me ask this question and then this question. And then at least, knowledge is strength.
Well, that's all I have. Thank you, Deb.
I'm just sitting over here a little agog just with the knowledge that you both possess and the fact that you can just share it so eloquently. So I appreciate you both for that. But we are going to wind down. I feel like we could be here all day if we really wanted to, just picking your guys' brains. But Deb, is there anything as we wrap up here that you would like to add?
Not really, just, use us, right? WCB is a neutral administrator of the Act, so it's not like we're sitting here with a horse in the race, but we do want to make sure that everyone is aware of their responsibilities, what they can do for best practices, how to pay the least amount that you possibly can in insurance. I don't want to pay more in insurance, and my husband was in the industry as an owner-operator, and we certainly didn't want to pay it more in insurance either. So Leigh-Ann has got a wealth of knowledge, and I think we both truly love working with the employers in this industry, and we're both maybe sometimes too honest. No. We certainly will tell you what you need to know. So
thank you so much, Deb. And a quick reminder to our listeners, we will have a lot of information in our show notes, and also ways that you can contact either WCB or AMTA for any questions that you might have. And on that AMTA front, Dave, thank you so much for all your help today. Is there anything that you would like to add?
The only thing I would add is, if you have questions about this stuff, there's just people to help. Reach out, contact the AMTA, you can contact WCB. There's lots of help out there, but it does require at times, you'll have to be the one to reach out. And otherwise, it's great to be here, Kelsey. Thank you.
Just a quick note of appreciation for both of you taking the time to chat with us today. We covered some really important ground. As always, thank you. And we might be seeing you again, Deb. I know that you love doing these things and love chatting with the people. You crushed it today. Dave, it is always a pleasure. We are going to wrap up this episode, but first we are going to throw to the final 2 of the best big rig movie ever. Rob, take it away.
All right, Kelsey, we're going into the semifinals. Where do we stand?
Well, Rob, we have a bit of a shocker for our first round. It was Smokey and the Bandit versus Chuck Norris and Breaker Breaker. And bye-bye, Smokey and the Bandit. Our first film moving on for the grand final is Breaker Breaker.
I'm going to put my 2 cents in here. You were all wrong. All of you. All of you that voted against it, you're all wrong.
All of you who voted for Breaker Breaker, I appreciate you greatly. Chuck Norris and his blue van win.
She is also wrong.
And going up against Breaker Breaker, who might that be, you ask? That is Maximum Overdrive, who took the bracket over White Line Fever. Sorry, White Line Fever and Jan Michael Vincent.
Can't really complain, though. I mean, Maximum Overdrive was still probably the most bananas movie we had on this entire list.
That is true, and let's face it, White Line Fever was god-awful.
It was terrible. It was. At least in this one, Maximum Overdrive had a ton of trucks, so we at least have that.
That is a fact. So you heard it here first, Steering Change fans. We want you to get on our social and vote. We have Breaker Breaker with Chuck Norris versus Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive. What say you?
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change Podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change Podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Do you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change Podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.